Have you ever noticed that the book of Genesis seems to tell the story of creation twice? Right at the very beginning, in chapters 1 and 2, we get two different accounts of how everything came to be. It's one of the most famous puzzles in the Bible, and it's not a new one. In fact, people have been scratching their heads over this for thousands of years. Today, we're going to dive deep into why there are two creation stories, how they clash, and the clever ways ancient editors and interpreters tried to make them fit together. So, what are these two stories? The first one, in Genesis chapter 1, is what we call the priestly account. It's grand and cosmic. God, called Elohim, creates the world in a super-orderly fashion over 6 days, culminating in the creation of humanity, male and female, together on day 6. Then, on the 7th day, God rests. It's structured, majestic, and everything happens in a neat sequence. Light, sky, land, plants, sun and moon, sea creatures and birds, and finally, land animals and humans. But then, as soon as we hit Genesis chapter 2, the story seems to restart, but with a totally different vibe. This second account is often called the Yahwist or J-source because God is referred to as YHWH Elohim, which we translate as Lord God. Here, the focus isn't on the whole cosmos, but on humanity. The order of creation is flipped. A man, Adam, is created first from the dust of the ground, even before there are any plants. Then God plants the Garden of Eden, and only after that does he create animals to be Adam's companions. When none of them are a perfect fit, God creates a woman, Eve, from Adam's rib. So you can see the contradictions, right? In chapter 1, plants come before humans. In chapter 2, the man comes before the plants. In chapter 1, humans are created last as a pair. In chapter 2, the man is created first, then animals, then the woman. It's a bit like watching two different movies of the same event, each with its own director, script, and focus. Now, you might wonder, why didn't the ancient scribes who compiled the Torah just pick one story and stick with it? Or maybe blend them together seamlessly, like they did with the two flood stories later in Genesis. The flood accounts, one from the priestly source and one from the Yahwist, were woven together into a single, though still slightly clunky, narrative. But with creation, they didn't do that. They just placed the two stories side by side. The likely reason is that both stories were too important and well-loved to be discarded. Each one offered a unique and valuable perspective. The first story gives us this grand, universal vision of God as the powerful creator of everything. The second gives us a more intimate, personal story about humanity's origins, our relationship with God, and the beginnings of human society. The editors of the Pentateuch were more like curators than authors. They saw their job as preserving these sacred traditions, not rewriting them. As the great scholar Hermann Gunkel said, they were servants of their traditions, not masters. But that doesn't mean they just slapped them together without any thought. They did make some subtle but brilliant editorial tweaks to help the two stories read as one. Let's look at the name of God, for instance. Genesis 1 uses Elohim. Genesis 2, which probably originally just used the personal name YHWH, now uses YHWH Elohim. This was a clever move. By adding Elohim, the editors were sending a clear signal to the reader. Hey, the YHWH in this story is the very same Elohim from the story you just read. It links the two accounts, showing that the personal God who walks in the garden is also the cosmic God who created the heavens and the earth. This choice of YHWH Elohim is also theologically significant. It emphasizes the universal relevance of Israel's God. YHWH isn't just a local deity. He is Elohim, the God of all creation. This combination of names is actually very rare in the rest of the Bible, appearing in specific contexts like when Moses confronts Pharaoh, or in the book of Jonah, both situations where God's power extends beyond Israel to the entire world. Another key piece of the puzzle is in the verse that connects the two stories, Genesis 2, verse 4. It says, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens." That phrase, in the day, or biyom in Hebrew, is super important. It doesn't necessarily mean a literal 24-hour day. It can also mean at the time or when. So, the editors use this phrase to bridge the two accounts. It suggests that the second story isn't a different creation, but rather a more detailed look at what happened during the time of creation described in chapter 1. It acts like a zoom-in lens, shifting from the wide-angle cosmic view to a close-up on the human. Drama in the Garden of Eden, This clever wording helps smooth over the contradictions in the timeline. This challenge of harmonizing the two creation accounts didn't stop with the original editors. Later interpreters continued to wrestle with it. Take the Book of Jubilees, a text from the 2nd century BCE that retells Genesis. The author of Jubilees was clearly bothered by the inconsistencies. So what did they do? They created a second week of creation. In their version, the 7 days of Genesis 1 happen in week 1. Then the events of Genesis 2, like the naming of the animals and the introduction of Eve to Adam, happened during a second week. They also tweaked the story so that the Garden of Eden was created on day 3, along with all the other plants, neatly solving the problem of Adam being created before vegetation. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which is even older than Jubilees, also shows signs of this kind of interpretive work. For example, in Genesis 2, verse 9, where it says God made trees grow in the garden, the Septuagint adds the little word additionally. So it reads that God made trees grow additionally. This implies that these were extra, special trees for the garden. On top of the ones already created back on day 3 in chapter 1, it adds a small change. But it's a deliberate attempt to harmonize the two accounts. Similarly, the Septuagint changes the end of the verse about the 7th day, where the Hebrew text says God rested from all the work he had created to do. The Greek version says he rested from the work he had begun to do. This subtle shift reframes the 7th day not as an end, but as a transition, paving the way for the next phase of creation in chapter 2. So what does all this tell us? It shows that the Bible isn't a flat, one-dimensional book that fell from the sky. It's a rich, complex library of texts, compiled and edited over centuries by people who deeply valued their traditions, even the seemingly contradictory ones. The presence of two creation stories isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It invites us to see creation from multiple perspectives, the cosmic and the personal, the orderly and the dramatic. The genius of the editors wasn't in erasing the differences, but in preserving them while creating a textual tapestry that was even richer and more compelling. This complexity, this tension between different voices and perspectives, is part of what has made the book of Genesis so endlessly fascinating. It forces every generation of readers to engage with the text, to ask questions, and to find their own meaning. It's a book that demands to be read and reread. And that's a big reason why it has survived and continues to speak to us thousands of years later. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this dive into Genesis interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of ancient texts. See you next time.